I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies.
Welcome to Cookies, the world's most influential basketball podcast. I'm Ben Detrick. Jordan Redaelli is on vacation. Andrew Kuo takes no days off. Andrew Kuo, how are you feeling?
Feeling pretty good, Ben. I've been working out for the last week. So last night I broke my own rule, took my basketball out, my Shaquille O'Neal Reebok pumps, and dunked on every court in New York City and tore down every rim. So if you go out today, you'll notice no rims out. It's because of me, man. I got air. I got air.
How dare you? We are here in a rimless New York City.
I just wanted it more, man. You should have seen me from hoop to hoop. I just had all the rims in New York City.
Before we talk about your rim job, let's just backtrack for our listeners here, because last episode, yesterday, we introduced a new concept, a new conceit for Cookies Hoops, and we were really enthusiastic about being a Criminal Intent Season 9 rewatch pod. And I'm going to be honest, I don't really blame anyone other than you, the listener, but the lack of respect and the lack of enthusiasm for our new format is a little disappointing.
It's like our fans didn't have that clutch gene. We put the rock in their hands and they bricked it.
If I wanted to delve further into this and I had the investigative acuity of, say, a Detective Goran, maybe Nichols, I could probably figure out some reasons why this hostility towards cops exists on our podcast. But I have some good news. We're going to retool this. We're going to take it back. We're going to workshop it a little bit. And right now we are leaning towards being an Insecure Season 2 podcast, rewatch, or Monk Season 5. So we're going to go back to the drawing board and see which shows deserve that kind of attention that only the Cookies Hoops listener deserves.
Those shows and seasons absolutely deserve revisiting, and we're going to go episode by episode and compare them to certain players on NBA teams. It's going to be fantastic. Are you more of a Monk guy? We'll find out.
Oh, man, this is going to be great. So
be
stay tuned for that kind of stuff. So, yeah, all the rims in New York City are now gone. Is this a good idea? This was I guess it was de Blasio. They went through and Shaquille O'Neal'd all the rims.
That's right. It's a sad optic, that's for sure. I haven't seen it because I actually haven't left my corner of my little rat's nest. But it's sad, but it's also necessary because people were bawling out. It's easy enough to do, sending around a couple guys taking down rims. But it's kind of a hand slap that makes me feel as a overall whole in New York City like a child. It's like, this is why you guys can't have nice things. You eat all the Halloween candy in one go. I'm like, but it's delicious.
As someone who really only likes my New York City law enforcement in the format of Criminal Intent Season 9, I have to say, people were still playing ball like a couple days ago. And it's going to be warmer and nicer. You kind of couldn't stop kids from hanging out there. And, even a couple days ago, there were teens like smoking weed and blowing smoke in each other's faces on the basketball court. And you can't have that because they're going to go home and they're going to give whatever they're passing around other than that doobie to their parents. You just can't have it. So I reluctantly agree that Mr. de Blasio, tear down that rim.
It's such an uphill battle with this thing, right? Because these kids will just find another way to smoke weed and blow smoke into their faces. But, you got to do everything. It's like, all right, we're going to take away the basketball. It's like, well, now they're hanging out on corners. Like, well, now do we have to put cops on corners? And it's like the task of flattening this curve, whatever you think that might be or take form of, is like so challenging. It's like everybody has to be on board, and it's just very.
The reason that I am actually in favor of them taking down the rims is that if kids are congregating there and you make it against the law, then you're creating situations in which teenagers, perhaps ones of color, are interacting with cops. And I don't like those odds. So I'd rather say, for the time being, get rid of the rims, and we will allow kids to go on with their lives, not being tempted into situations in which they will be confronted by the NYPD.
Right, because we're getting to that point where it's just going to be like cops telling people what to do. And you're right. Those situations should be avoided as much as possible, desperately.
Yeah, and that's why even when you see, like, there was a writer put up a video of someone smoking on the train, and like it showed the person's face, and she added the MTA or, MTA cops or something. And people were like, what are you doing? Why are you snitching on this person? He's clearly homeless or mentally ill or sick. It's like, I get it. You don't want people smoking on the subway, but why are you introducing an element of like law enforcement to this person?
Or does that person just want to get some likes and some follows, It's like the opportunistic kind of social media behavior. If you're like, you're being a cop, you're like, oh, I am.
Well, if you put it up without tagging the MTA and being like, shit is wild, it would have gone viral and people would have paid attention to it.
Oh, that's not what happened?
No, they like put up the thing and sent a message like to the MTA, like security or whatever, and was like, you should know there's someone on the train, and like showed the person's face instead of being like, New York is crazy right now. Which would have served the same purpose, but no one would have figured out that you were at heart law enforcement.
Did they make a one-off sweatshirt that described the dictionary definition of smoking?
Did you see that clip of the guy like hanging off the side of the train?
No. What was that about? Wild.
The train's going along, let's say the J line. I don't know if it actually was the J, but between say like Marcy and
Shout
something.
out to my train.
Yeah, it was like, it was an elevated train, and the person's hanging from the with his hands in the window, which is like bent inwards, and he's just dangling with two hands as it's going whipping across like an elevated area.
That is
really
wild.
Nuts.
What was it? Cool? Was it like an extreme walking thing?
I don't know. It was someone inside, with their phone being like, "This is crazy! Like,
that
look
is
at this
crazy.
guy."
Right. Yeah, I know, right? Like, it's all the framing. I was joking the other day that my entire news feed was the Denzel Washington relief meme, but whoever writes the first thing first. So I see something trending, and the first Denzel meme be like, I thought so-and-so was dead, but he's just trending because everyone thinks he's not the greatest player of all time. I'm like, that's all the news I need,
It's super annoying.
Yeah.
Every time you go on Twitter, you see 6 celebrities on the side. It's like Ariana Grande. And you're like, oh my God, not her. It's like, oh, she's just dating someone who looks like Pete Davidson. Oh, whew, thank goodness. Christian Laettner, is he sick? Is he in the hospital with a ventilator? Oh no, he's just a replay of him dispatching the Kentucky Wildcats for the last second shot.
Yeah, can we give that a name in NBA terms, like Schadenfreude? It's like wishing the worst things on like Duke players and be like, oh, they're just replaying a classic game.
But yeah, odd times overall. And I guess for people in New York City who are in this epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic, we're experiencing things that people in other places likely will as well. Maybe we're a little ahead of the curve, like normal. And what we're seeing and what we're experiencing will be your reality in Jacksonville very shortly. So some of the things that New York City has done, and we referred to the one about ripping down the rims and Kuo going around and
Beast.
windmilling them off and taking them home. But another thing that New York has done, in the face of great outcry for freezing rent, they've decided to let people use the security deposit, cash security deposit apparently, for your rent next month. What an amazing gesture. And they're calling it the renter's choice.
Is this kind of a Ponzi scheme? Like,
does everything need to not benefit the little guy? It's like, I don't know, man. This sounds like you might actually be getting a little bit more money in this horrible situation than normal, so we can't have that.
You can pay for this with your own money. You can give yourself relief with your own money. It's like, this sounds amazing.
The renter's choice.
What happens if I don't use that security deposit for my rent this month? It's like, oh, you get it back in the end. It's your money. It's like, wait, so I'm just paying for it. Like, yes, you're just paying.
Okay, I'll do it. I'm broke as shit. I'm broke. I have to do it. Thank God I can use my security deposit. But then, like, what happens after that? Okay, in 4 months, is your landlord like, can you pay back your security deposit now? Because if you leave and, put holes in the wall, I have no way of getting my money back other than suing you. And my thing is not out of that much concern for landlords in this situation, but inevitably this will come back on the renter and they'll have to just repay it.
Yeah, this is it's just digging a deeper hole.
Okay, it's time for me to move out. Well, you don't have a security deposit down, so I'm going to have to take a look at the apartment before you leave and then charge you for issues or sue you or whatever. It just opens up another can of worms, especially because due to recent laws, they can only keep 1 month security deposit, which is a good thing for renters, but it doesn't make this a more acceptable solution to a rent freeze.
And the Fed didn't help New York City out in the slightest. They gave us, I think, quickly like $5 billion coronavirus related loss, which is funny because that's like, it has to be litigated a little bit. It doesn't really help small businesses, renters. It was not something that someone would look at like me and you and be like, okay, help is on its way. Okay, we just have to hold it together. We looked at it and we were like, oh, we're on our own. No one's coming to help us, man. So we have to look at our employers who have to look at their banks that they have loans from. And it's just like, this is going to be really challenging, man.
And I think that's the disappointing part there are many disappointing parts about this entire experience. And without listing them all, they go to our nation's, preparation and healthcare system, etc. But leaving even those glaring abominations aside for the moment, the fact that the government is so loath to help people, but is so horny to help corporations could not be more overt. It's like, the corporations, man, we're here for you. We will help you, Boeing. We promise. And it's like, oh, people? No, you guys suck. And you might have to die. It's like, such a middle finger in a way that isn't even the George Bush version of compassionate conservatism, which did the same things but sugarcoated them. This is just like a hard fuck you.
It's wild how trickle-down economics appeals to so many people with a certain lean about how they feel about class and money and all that. To me, 2020, if you told me in the late 90s that trickle-down economics would be a big part of 2020 politics, I would have bet against it. Because it doesn't work. We've seen it not work. We know how people behave more now, and Reagan really tried to push this, and it was kind of a failure. And I think, I thought people were like, this doesn't work, so let's move on.
Oh, you're thinking about this wrong, right, Kuo?
Go ahead.
Because it did work, and that's why they continue doing it, because
right.
It does exactly what it's supposed to do.
Well, what I'm saying is, not, of course, the corporations and the White House and government are the same thing. I'm talking about people who support these policies, but really it's just racism, right? Or like coastal elitism, being like, well, New York, if they think they're so cool, deal with this. And I'm like, oh, that's an interesting take. I know where that's coming from, but like, it's just foul a little bit.
Well, it's the same way that we look at the evolution of any creature, right? And they grow more and more complex as time goes on. And, oh, this insect has developed the ability to camouflage itself as a poisonous insect or of a bird. And, you know, like all these attributes. And you look at the way that our capitalist system has evolved, and it follows those same evolutionary trail when it just gets more and more nefarious and changes and mutates. So to your point, like, yeah, we thought that we would be done with this because it was clear that it didn't work. And it's like, no, we're just going to do it in a totally different way now. We're going to just keep evolving, and it's going to be heavily corporation, but now we're going to use immigrants. Now we're going to go over to vilify trans people. Now it's going to be the coastal elites and the liberals. And it's just this evolving way of screwing people. And what is wild to me is that America has this reputation for cherishing, I don't know, individual responsibility and just the idea of American exceptionalism and self-reliance and machismo, and how seductive that is towards this like idea of like, screw you, where it's like, I'm sorry, you'll get nothing and like it because we're Americans. And we're so broken and so docile that you see them unspooling these plans that are insane. Yeah. And we're like, I might complain about that a little online. And, you know, we're so different from like Paris, or, you know, the French will go into the streets for nothing. And we are really docile. And it's kind of cloaked in this idea of like American exceptionalism and self-reliance that we don't want our government to do anything.
I mean, I love this country very much, and I love the NBA very much, and it reminds me of like the BMM and all these ideas that we kind of talk about and frame the things we see in the NBA around like wanting it more, and the things we beat to death here, clutch genes, failure, success. And America has these ideas too. It's cloaked in this idea of the individual. If you get knocked down, you pick yourself up again, and what the hell is a bootstrap, you know? And and these are the premises in which we think about moments like this. Like, well, New York City is just going to have to dig deep and find a way. I'm like, no, that's not how anything works, right? Like, every player gets to the point in their career where they can succeed because there's help and there's a support system. And we pay a lot of money in taxes, and I hate to be that adult who's like, well, where are my taxes going? Because as a young man, I was like, well, this is our responsibility and this is just what we had to do. But now where we're seeing where that money goes, I'm like, I'm not sure I agree with that. And this is about voting and politics. And the docility you talk about is something that's really interesting to me, because we're kind of in the middle in the world, right? Like, there are countries that, like, for example, China, there is no voice of the people.
Right.
And that to me is a really difficult thing to wrap my head around, being an American. And there's been pushback, and, you know, before all this happened, oh man, like the Hong Kong thing seems like awful still, but like a concern of a yesteryear, you know? But that was about speech and representation and taxation and policy. And, you know, Hong Kong is an anomaly in China, and maybe that's why that kind of conflict develops. In America, you're right. Like, I've stopped listening to my Twitter feed because I have curated it to a point that it doesn't really reflect something else. Like, my Twitter feed's like, Bernie Sanders is president, the Knicks are still relegated, and the Boston Celtics are repeat champions every year in the NBA. You know, like, I'm like, true, this is just true for my Twitter, but because I follow the BMM, because what choice is there? But I know what you mean, and I think this bill coming out was very frustrating. And when you say, like, the docile complacency of our psyche as a nation, it's hard to deny that point at a time like this, right?
Yeah, for me, it's kind of the fact that it's so unvarnished as a screw you to the regular person, and there's not even an attempt to camouflage it or put up some facade of helpfulness. Is not just that they've abdicated all responsibility to helping people. It's that they don't even care to make it look like that anymore. And it's odd that there's really no outcry. And then you compare the way that people behaved when a few people yelled at senators while they were eating dinner. And like the breach of civility. It was like Schumer has to come up and be like, guys, I know you disagree with these Republicans, but don't interrupt their dinners. And this call for Joe Biden and decency, it does have that good cop, bad cop dynamic where here come the Dems and they're like, guys, we hear what you're saying. We'll make progress in that way. Trust me. But like, please don't block traffic. Don't disrupt people's nachos. Don't break a window of a Starbucks. And the Republicans are like, we agree with them, except our solution is that we're going to arrest you and we're going to have the cops will have tanks and we're going to use hyper surveillance. And you're like, okay, I guess we'll wait a little longer then. I think that seems okay.
I think this point comes to play also in the way people have been really rallying around Andrew Cuomo, because he's been extremely civil and he talks in a way our president doesn't, who is not civil at all, has not shown much of that characteristic throughout his whole tenure and even this week. So, Cuomo's popularity is kind of soaring where we're getting Democrats wondering aloud if he should be the nomination to defeat Trump. And I'm like, does all it take, is bedside manner all it takes? Maybe. Like, I really appreciate the scary people in my life, like my accountant or like someone with power over me, having kind of like a delivery that's soft. I really appreciate that. But is it better than policy or action or ideas? Never. The best thing is someone screaming on the Senate floor with
governance
good
by
ideas.
Governance by ASMR.
I have not been able to get into ASMR. Have you tried that out?
Yeah, we talked about like Steve 1989. That's basically ASMR.
True. But he is ASMR, but he crosses over to many amazing things. I'm just talking like, do you listen to like someone brushing their hair?
I like some sounds. Like I like cooking stuff.
I like that.
Someone grinding up spices and I don't know, making a cake, but there's no sound other than like the sound of the like whatever, a mixing bowl or a spoon. I think that stuff is like nice and relaxing and sort of like
that sounds incredible. Is that on
out.
YouTube? Is it a thing?
Oh yeah, there's tons of that stuff.
Cooking
just type
ASMR?
in like cooking ASMR, no talking. Like I don't like the I don't really dig the whole whispery shit, but I do like the background noise, like ambient noises, and people like. There's other stuff that's kind of cool where it'll be like someone finding an old, I don't know, axe or an old antique and like bringing it and forming it and shaping it and repainting it and creating it into like a new object. I think those are all like very chill things to like watch or listen to while you're like reading a book, if you read books.
Which no one does. Yeah, my wife is not a super basketball fan, and she deals with my bullshit, not only in basketball but in life. But having a game on is, I think, like kind of like a nice thing, and I'm aware of it maybe not being such a comforting thing to everybody, but in our house, maybe once in a while, it signifies like some normalcy. And I don't get emotional during games because I know the Knicks are relegated and this is a new medal. But I watch it, I laugh, and it's like a comforting thing to have around. So that's a version of ASMR for like my space.
Yeah, I think it's sort of stigmatized as being some, like anime-looking chick being like, "Hi, welcome to ASMR."
Is it? That sounds comforting enough.
But I think it's what you said. It's background noise, at least for me. I think
Pleasurable.
baseball, growing up, like my dad always had baseball games on.
That's so
The sound
nice.
of a baseball game on the radio. Or like, do you play jazz in your kitchen? That's something that I think a lot of people like. Talk
NPR,
radio,
yeah.
NPR, jazz. Like, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just, it's a comforting sound.
Yeah.
And maybe ASMR has more of these distinct like triggers that sort of like make your nerves clench up and shit.
Yeah.
But it's the same idea, I think.
And to the exact opposite, I have a rule now where I can only watch bad news, CNN, until maybe like 7 o'clock, and then it's just over. If something bad happens, I'll read about it on Twitter probably, but no more like of the tone of despair. It's like
I can't watch the news.
it's tough. I mean, I want to stay plugged in because these are really important nuggets occasionally, but it's difficult. And I think having all this bad news injected into your skull constantly on a very subtle or not so subtle level is like harmful. I just don't.
I
love it.
agree. I think that's true. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, and we've talked about it in other episodes, the sort of toxicity of being online heavily and being inundated or with bad news all the time as a cause for anxiety.
For sure.
And for me, because I get so much of my news online, there's something about watching TV with the audio and the visual and the inability to control how I digest it that I find intolerable. Like, I can't do it. I can't sit there and watch a news segment without the ability to like quickly scroll past it or not hear the audio or just read it in text. I find it an overwhelmingly annoying way at this point in my life to digest news.
Yeah, it's a tolerance thing, and my tolerance is going down. But have you read that, or have you seen that MSNBC and CNN are editing the Corona press conferences because everything Trump says just like injects more fear into everybody, and Fauci has to like disassociate everything he says from actual information, being like, okay, this is just wistful thinking on the president's part, but what actually is happening is, and Trump's on the side just like pouting. So they've been editing them or even cutting away from Trump talking, or so they say they're going to move forward doing that, which I think is so interesting.
Well, if Trump is going to approach this pandemic as a way to settle scores and rally for his own presidential campaign, they can't put him on TV.
I kind of agree.
Do it. They can't do it. That's not what this is for. And you're using precious airtime that can be giving people real information with real doctors with garbage and like partisan nonsense. Yeah. And I get that it's the president and it's newsworthy. Yeah. But once he starts ranting about the media members in the room, you just cut away. Like, we're not doing this. You are here to talk about what you're doing for our country and how you're going to help the people. When you start saying, "Hey, you've been mean to me," like, just
Is he
get out of
being
here.
censored?
But I mean, it shouldn't be on TV anyway. Trump just saying, "Here I am, put me on TV," that's not relevant. If he's saying, "I should be broadcast across America because I want to say some things about the media," then there's no obligation to do that.
True.
If he's up here saying, "Hey, I'm going golfing, want to bring some cameras," there's no obligation to show that.
My favorite thing is when they're like, "We've been working day and night so hard." This guy, Mike Pence, he's been working so hard. I'm like, isn't this your damn job? Aren't like, I was joking with someone on Twitter. It's like, oh yeah, we've been golfing day and night. No one has golfed as much as us. We're golfers. I'm like, yeah, isn't that what golfers do? Golf?
Yeah, you golf.
It's like as if Cookies Hoops was trying to get a pat on the back for being the most influential Law and Order's Criminal Intent Season 9 podcast. Like, this is just, it flows through us, man.
You know, it's I on one hand, I know we're doing the right thing by changing direction, but I am a little rueful and a little remorseful of those kids out there who were waiting to hear about Law and Order Criminal Intent Season 9, Episode 2, Loyalty, Part 2. And I'll be honest, you're going to have to get that somewhere else. Like, We're not here for that anymore, and I'm sorry, but that's just how it's going to be.
You're being such a Nichols right now.
Oh, Goran.
Classic Eames.
So now that we've seen politics and, our social life and sports, everything unraveling because of coronavirus, we see now the effects of this on the influencer industry, because this could be, a halcyon era for them. They don't need big studios. They just have their phone. They're at home. They are blessed professionally with a captive audience. What is it like as an influencer right now, Andrew Kuo?
I wouldn't know, but I'm a fan of many influencers. And I still think it's the halcyon days. I think it's the golden age of this stuff. It's just changing, right? Like a bad but maybe acceptable take to a market crashing, I've heard, is it weeds out some of the unusual stocks that have been propped up without much true confidence. And those will disappear, and then it's like the idea of like weeding your garden or something simple as that. But
so you're saying only the truest influencers will live to influence on.
The funniest influencers will do great, and the influencers that don't have ideas will kind of like wait for a better opportunity, right? Like Allison Roman, one of my favorite people on Twitter, she's thriving. Like her dining in cookbook and all of her recipes from the pantry, like that's awesome. She has like a corner to reside in on the internet during this thing, and good influencers are awesome and show us their shoes and what they've been cooking and their daily life, and we love it. And bad influencers just maybe will have to wait for another opportunity.
What I do find particularly discordant and galling is the influencers who are still kind of showing their better quality of life, their wealth. It's a gross time for that, I think.
It's
because so many people are really struggling and resentful of their situation, which is so out of their control. And you see people in these beautiful houses or, their glamorous lives that they're still on with their like beautiful partners. And you're like, read the room, guys.
Yeah. I saw Mike Trout, the maybe best baseball player ever, like messing around in his $1 zillion mansion, like playing golf and like hitting holes in ones with these games. I'm like, this is entertaining, but all I'm looking at is how much money you have, and it makes me so sad.
Yeah, like Arnold is there in his pool, smoking a cigar, and you're like, we know you're rich.
Right.
You're super famous and a massive international celebrity for like the last 30 years.
Yeah.
But like most people aren't in the pool smoking a cigar. And I think that's why that Imagine song was so despised, because it was like a meaningless gesture from people who are in far better positions than us. Thanks.
I thought that was a selector issue. I thought it could have been a hit if they chose like a yeah.
Kuo, rewind selector.
If
Get Chet Hayes on this.
What song would have saved that meme or that video? Like a Prince song, everyone would be like, amazing. I'm going to send this to my mom. It was just Imagine.
Yeah, I think it would have had to have been a humiliating song. It couldn't have been uplifting, or like it couldn't have been
aspirational, or
yeah. It couldn't have been a rap song, because that would have looked like some gross Ben Folds 5 bullshit. So it had to be wow. Something funny.
Yeah, it had to have been. Wait, are you claiming Ben Folds 5 was a fake rap group?
No, when they did like a rap cover song,
Oh.
They did like, I forget, Gin and Juice or something.
Yeah, that's always awkward for sure. People shoot that shot sometimes, and it doesn't really work as much as you think. But yeah, what would have been a better song, man? Like, could have been, what is a beloved song that was written in the last 10 years that they could have sung to bring everyone under 50 years old into this conversation?
I think it had to be a fun song and not a moody one where it felt like they were poking fun at themselves as well.
Right. Taylor Swift is close, but that's not quite it. Ed Sheeran?
Just pick a Rihanna song and like be on your way.
Universally beloved artist that no one ever has anything bad to say about.
And there's no way you'll do it as well as her, so it's intentionally set up as a failure, which makes it seem more morally aware of itself.
I think that's the winner.
But as far as like cooking goes, there was an article on Jezebel that talked about the flex of cooking is over because everyone's at home and everybody's cooking. I didn't understand the point of that article.
Neither did I.
But
it's an interesting idea.
But also, for the normal person now, is Instagram even a flexing location anymore? Because people don't even put up photos that much.
I know. Yeah, it's true. I'm still a fan of the Instagram photo, but you're right. It's all stories and now Instagram Live.
I mean, of course, people are like flexing in the stories, but they're temporary. So it's not like you're putting together this carefully curated feed of everything in similar color palette and just this, oh, look at these beautiful aesthetics that I've put together. Great architecture. The perfect dish with the nice tangerines laden on the side. Like that doesn't kind of exist anymore outside of brands. And if you look at one of those kind of influencers now, it seems so retrograde. It's like 2012 latte with a heart in it or something. Like it just feels so vestigial.
Yeah, it's changing, and I think it is migrating to different platforms and different ways of talking and media, but I think it's growing exponentially, right? Like there's more of this information to consume than ever. Like the sneakers app was trending again today, which was like such a comfort for me to see trending and not someone's like illness or death, which is right there too. But to see people beefing about not getting their shoes on the sneaker app was like a really welcome feeling. and shout out to the people who still care about shoes, because that's awesome. And like I really root around in the internet like a truffle hog, Anthony Davis, for these little corners where people are still talking about like Nike dunks.
Yeah, I just feel like we're watching design aesthetics shift and at the same time as we're watching the behavioral method of using social media. And together they kind of create an interesting dynamic where we're going from highly curated design and a photo that's going to be there forever towards anti-design and fleeting temporary stories that maybe only some of your followers will watch that will be erased within 24 hours. Those things together as vectors, I think, have changed the way that the Instagram curation was. But also, this is all kind of boring, right? Because whenever we're talking about one old trend, cooking in a time when we need to be inside, cooking in winter, and like, let's add Instagram to that. Let's add coronavirus. Now it's a news story. And it's like, it's not a news story. It's the same shit we've been talking about forever. We're just adding a couple variables to make it sound timely, and like respect to cultural writers, because I've been there and I know how this works. Like add in Twitter, add in Instagram, add in cell phones, add in YouTube. Everything is in the age of Instagram.
And that's okay, and I love that, and that's the way things go. Like Blu-ray, Star Wars #1 came out in 1977 with bonus materials. I'm like, okay, I'm down. And it's so funny because I look around my apartment and I see the things I used to care about that I no longer care about at all, like fancy art books that I have on my shelf that I used to be obsessed with, making my own little zines, collecting really beautiful books, having them on the shelf, looking at them once in a while. I just do not care anymore. My records, I just toss like 95% of my records. Some Mike Zoot doubles, some Reflections Eternals,
Why
quadruples.
do you think that's because of this current situation, or are you just sort of dumping art books naturally?
It was already happening to me, and the things that have more and more value to me, sadly, are like the information I get from my TV, my computer, my phone. And those objects are useless, but the things that come through occupy the space where an art book used to occupy. And a lot of that is the same material, but like an idea instead of like, I don't read, but let's say I read essays in an art book. I imagine those ideas to be the same as the ones I read on the internet. But my brain is changing in a way that it is surprising to me. And it's hard to figure out this week, these last 2 weeks, like what I will care about in the future.
Art books in the age of Corona.
Like, can you get these out of my house? Like,
cooking in the age of YouTube.
I care a lot about cooking.
Rap in the age of MySpace.
Ooh.
Traveling in the age of Facebook.
Or photos in the age of Friendster, right?
That's
selfies. I like it
as
all.
As old hands are on the cultural beat. I'm familiar with the permutation.
But it's good. So this is like the best ever. If everyone's staying at home trying to think of creative content, I think this is the most fun we'll have with social media, right? Because it just gets less fun after this.
Good point. Because social media is here forever. Mm-hmm. No question. But I remember hearing about a group of like young Parisian kids who were like the coolest of the cool. This is like a year or two ago. And how they were foregoing smartphones. That was at least the rumor, right? Oh, you should meet these kids. They're like super cool young guys.
I remember that. There's some cool kids in New York that tried that too.
Yeah, it's like they're just using flip phones, no Instagram, no maps, just for basic texts and phone calls. And like that's all they're using it for. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if this continued on or it was just sort of a performative little trend.
It's like 8-bit Nintendo dance music was going to take over the world until it didn't.
He loves some good chippy ass music.
I do. I really do. But Malcolm McLaren wrote that essay. It's like, this is the next thing. I'm like, eh.
So that's what I'm kind of contemplating here. Once we get out of this element of oversaturation in social media, does it swing back the other direction where we say, you know what, I'm used to not using my phone when I'm out of the house now. Like, I don't like touching my phone when I'm going around. It makes me feel weird. Let me experience real life. Or is it that we're so now into social media that this will actually spur even more gravitation towards using social media at all times?
I think, unfortunately, and I hope we can get out of this in the near or visible future, everything we don't like is going to be accelerated a zillion times. Like, all of our favorite bars are going to turn into Chase Banks. And there's going to be no, like, again, what we said yesterday, like, whatever you're thinking about is coming out during a time like this. And I'm like, oh, cool, back to, like, grassroots art stuff, back to people doing pop-up galleries and bars and restaurants. I'm like, no, it's all going to be Wells Fargo and all of us with masks staring at our phones twice as much.
So this terrible situation that we find ourselves in right now, this is apex. It only gets worse from here.
I can't see it getting like more sympathetic to workers, right?
Well, right. But then again, look, it is possible to have a huge, important, meaningful shift. For example, if you look at Criminal Intent season 9,
episode
3, really, because we saw Goran ushered off the program and Jeff Goldblum as Detective Nichols took over the reins. So like, it is possible to have a transformative change coming off of something as meaningful as Loyalty episodes 1 and 2.
Although when you think of Criminal Intent season 9, it's still,
which I do all the time,
which is the only thing we think about. It's still a Goran and Eames show, right? Like, they are the soul of this show. Goldblum is just a new shiny Supreme hoodie or 8-ball leather jacket that you put on for the winter.
Right. Even though Goran leaves the show, it's still the shadow of Goran overwhelms.
Goran. It's true. It's like
you can't. He's a giant. He's a Goliath. You can't just get him off the show and not think that his, planetary gravity won't impact the rest of it. Come on, be serious.
But I love how into food he was. Those episodes that are not season 9 when he leaves the show after 2 episodes after Loyalty. But I love it when there's a murder in a kitchen and he gets derailed by the food. And Eames is like, focus. And he's like, right. I'm just a fat kid trapped in a cop's body.
Yeah, what a legend.
Yeah, a damn king.
So basketball, what do we got here?
Oh, right.
Yes. Speaking of fat kids trapped in a cop's body, Luka Doncic. Woo! That is a fat kid trapped in a cop's body if I've ever seen one. So
the Nacho King.
So now that the season is likely over in terms of regular games, and hopefully we'll come back for the playoffs. But the NBA season as we know it is complete. So people are taking up some time by announcing who they view as the winners of the regular season awards. And I know the Ringer is doing this, our buddies, and Dan Devine, whichever one. He is a friend of the pod, great writer.
Awesome.
And he had a piece today about most improved. And out of all of the postseason awards, that's one that I find a little more interesting and compelling to discuss. I don't find Sixth Man of the Year interesting, or MVP, or Coach of the Year,
Depoy,
Defensive Player of the Year.
That's Gobert, right? I wanted Simmons, but
yeah, I think he had it as Giannis, but anyway, that's Dan.
Yep.
But I thought most improved is interesting. And he said, in his opinion, it was Luka Doncic. So I pose this question to you, Andrew Kuo. Is Luka Doncic disqualified because he was a top 5 pick, the Rookie of the Year, and expected to become a star? Should that be held against him if we're talking about most improved player in the NBA?
Right, which is a backhanded compliment because it almost injects the idea that you either were bad or no one expected this from you. Shout out to Devontae Graham being like, oh, whoa, with Luka, yeah, right, he was the GOAT. He could be the best player of this generation. So him winning Rookie of the Year and then winning Most Improved Player is kind of an odd feeling, right? Because he's just growing as a player in the league in his second year. With all these expectations heaped on him. That said, he's awesome. There's no bad choice here. It's a lot of feelings in the way you frame it. But I wouldn't have him. I would have Bam Adebayo as my most improved, who didn't have the expectations Luka does.
I think Doncic's incredible natural trajectory is a bit disqualifying. Fair. Because, to your point, after last season, in which he won Rookie of the Year, we thought this guy might end up being the next best player on the planet. It's all right here. He's this young. He's this good. He was that great in Europe. It was insane that he was not drafted this, higher, but he eats this many nachos.
Like a king.
And him improving dramatically in his second year made a lot of sense. Yeah. He's acclimated to the athleticism of the NBA. He's around better trainers. He's adjusting his nacho lifestyle. He's just getting into adulthood. I mean, he's still so young, but he's growing into more of an adult body. Right. It makes sense that, and from a team perspective, the Mavericks decided to build around him.
Yep.
It wasn't like last season when you had the legend Dennis Smith Jr. there, and they were kind of sorting out who was going to run this team. They said no, it's Luka Doncic. Everything goes around him, and his usage
apples
went
and
up.
oranges, man.
His shots went up, his assists went up, And he became the entire focal point of the NBA's best offense, which is a credit to his ability, but it also, in my mind, shows why he improved so much.
The system has to be in place because Kemba Walker leaves Charlotte and Devontae Graham has the opportunity to gobble up some of those touches and some of that usage, even with Terry Rozier there. But yeah, right. Like, choosing an opportunity for a player really changes their entire thing. And a player like Luka Doncic, that was waiting for him a little bit. Okay, so let's reframe it. Can you manufacture a most improved player now for next year? Probably, right?
Yeah, because the best example of this is Devontae Graham. Mm-hmm. Take a player with some talent, put him in a position in which he is going to get a elevated opportunity on a lousy team and watch his numbers explode. And I think Devontae Graham could be a most improved candidate, but I also don't love the second-year player in that regard. I'm okay with it. It's not like disqualifying, but I don't love it.
But
because to what you said, he might have been this good last year too. He just didn't get a chance to play, and now he's playing, and he's stepping into a role on a garbage team and being decent at it.
Yeah, and to give him a little more credit, I think going into the season, if you said Terry Rozier had the possibility or the chance to be most improved player, I would have believed that. I'm like, oh yeah, if he gets monster usage on a bad team like that he didn't have in Leprechaun Land, sure, right? Like, he's in the running, but it ends up being Devontae Graham, so I'm kind of like conveniently framing this as like there was space opened up because Rozier should have occupied that space, right?
Yep, but he was hurt.
That's true too. Yeah. But Devontae came out firing, man.
No, he was great. He had a really strong season, and I think he's a reasonable candidate for this. Some of the other guys
Who's your
that
guy?
have been mentioned. Well, you've got someone like Brandon Ingram, and he's a pretty good candidate. He shot really, really well out of the gate and was on fire in some of the early months of the season.
And so bad in LA.
Yeah, he was just an utterly mediocre non-factor in LA and became an efficient volume scorer in New Orleans while the team was dog shit. Mm-hmm. And he might be one of those guys who benefits by the season ending prematurely.
Right,
just possibly.
Yeah, Zion was getting in there.
Zion was getting in there. But generally, when someone's three-point numbers take an enormous spike, they come down to earth. And, post-break, it wasn't a lot of games, but he was only shooting 32% in the 9 games after the break. And he had shot, well over 40%, I believe, in a few other months. So we could have seen him just hitting the kind of slump in three-point shooting that happens over the course of a year. Because some guys shot well early, and they weren't going to continue. Marcus Morris shot 44% in New York, and through 12 games for the Clippers, was shooting 28%.
Yeah, we got a pick for him. It was amazing.
Right. Like, this is just what happens when you rely on a three-point shooter. That is a very, very tenuous investment because three-point shooting is all over the place. It's a low sample size because the hot hand exists. But look, Philly fell victim to it 2 years in a row. They went and coughed up picks for Alec Burks and Big Dog 3 because they shot well. And they did it the year before with Tobias Harris, who shot 43% in Los Angeles, despite having a 36% career from three percentage. And then he went and shot 33% in Philly. Like, that's what you want to do if you have a guy who's on fire like the Knicks did. You want to sell high. So anyway, all that discussion to get back to Brandon Ingram, he's going to get a max contract. He scored a ton of points this year. He's a totally valid most improved player of the year. But there is a little thing in the back of my mind that's like, did he get saved by the bell?
I mean, the Bagpipe Boys up in the Northeast have a guy similar to this, Jason Tatum, who really benefited for a hot month of three-point shooting and maybe was saved by the bell and will also get a super duper max contract. And it's a tough place to be objectively because
Well, he's got one more year, but he'll probably sign an extension.
Okay, right. I mean, he's going to get all the money he wants from Boston, I think, at this point. But it really helps optically that he ends the year with this spiked 3-point percentage. And, the numbers are the numbers, and they are what they are. So Ingram is a candidate for most improved, but this is kind of when white and off-white. I keep on saying that, but this is where feelings come in and what you think would have happened versus what did happen.
Yeah, and I'm not even trying to knock his first half performance. He shot really well. It was just that his improvement, a lot of it was based on his 3-point percentage being significantly higher than his career average. And he shot really well from the line too. He just shot the ball exceedingly well for the first half of the season.
And this kind of shooting behaves in random sample sizes. It could be games, weeks, half seasons, or full seasons. Like LeBron James' numbers kind of change without a trend that's noticeable, like from free throw or something.
And 3-point shooting is notoriously volatile. I don't know why. No one's been able to really explain it that well. Mm-hmm. But it is rare when someone just knocks out a similar percentage year in and year out.
Yeah.
You'll see wild swings where someone will shoot 38% and then 32%. And you're like, what happened? I don't know. Maybe someone just, had their form really down for a little while. Maybe they hurt their thumb. You just don't know. But it
Maybe
is
the
one
line
of
was closer.
You really can't assume that getting a 40% shooter is going to shoot 40% from you, especially in the second half of the season.
Yeah, in a way, it's the most interesting stat in basketball to me, because dunks are the best, but those are like 95%. The volatility of the 3-point shot, I think, is always fun to screw
And one
around
thing
with.
that's interesting is when you talk about the frequency of threes, that's how you actually make it reliable. And that's really what the Rockets are doing. The Rockets are trying to take 50 threes a game in order to get rid of that volatility. Mm-hmm. Because if you're a bad team, you want volatility. But if you're a good shooting team, you want consistency. Right. If you're like, we're going to take 50 threes and we're just trying to get up to our league average amount and that will make us win a game, we can't be happy with 25 threes because there's too much variability in there.
What an anti-hot hand take.
Well, yeah, but I don't think teams get hot hands.
Are you sure?
No, I think individuals do. I don't think teams do.
Okay. Fair.
I think teams cook.
Watch me cook during this shelter session.
What do you think about Siakam as a most improved candidate?
I don't think he's been exceptionally good this year. I think he's been really good. I think we're throwing accolades on him because we feel guilty for Kawhi Leonard leaving to brighter pastures or bigger pastures. Siakam, statistically, I don't know since B-Ball Reference changed their entire metric, but he wasn't as good as, say, our guy Ben Simmons or Bam Adebayo, and he was doing a lot on the court, and he was the optical focus of that team that was overachieving. But I think he's just like a cool player we love to think about, being like, is he the most underrated? I'm like, no, now he's the most overrated. He's really good, but he's not in that discussion to me.
I feel the exact same way because he came out of the gate so hot, and everyone was like, he's better than Kawhi Leonard.
Yeah, we wanted that take so bad.
And then the Raptors ended up overperforming for most of the season. So even though he hasn't been that great since then, he's been good, and he's a very good player. He was a starter in the All-Star game. He has a reputation that he is now a star. And I think he's a star, but he's not definitely a superstar. He's a good player. But if you look at the way that his efficiency has, not to be an efficiency dork here, but if you look at the way that, his efficiency has flagged, it makes total sense. And that it's someone absorbing a greater responsibility. He doesn't get as many open threes as he got last season. He's forced to take more hard shots where they're like, all right, dude, we need a bucket. You're our guy. Go make one happen. When that was Kawhi's job last year. His performance in both the spike in scoring, but also his sort of, I guess, almost a little bit disappointing falls in things like efficiency make total sense.
Definitely. And I'm looking at his numbers now. In a vacuum of just his numbers, his BPM went down from last year. His defensive BPM went down. His offense is the same, like 0.1 difference. His per, which is a terrible stat, but it's the same exact thing. His offensive rating fell off of a cliff because of like volume, right? What you were discussing.
He's just taking harder shot. He's taking harder shots now.
Yes, and it's affecting his game, but it takes him out of the most improved player conversation completely, I think.
I agree, because then we're just rewarding
vibes,
opportunity, and volume. We're not actually saying, "Wow, you figured something out."
Right.
But a really good player, and I don't mind him being mentioned in this conversation. He just doesn't, in my mind, have as convincing an argument as someone you just mentioned, our boy Bam.
Bam, really love him. That was a team I was really looking forward to seeing end the year. Bam turned into kind of like a second-tier star in the NBA, which was something, we predicted going into the season, not to mention fantasy, but like I tried to get him across the board at the late first round. And I think the nerds knew it, but I wasn't quite confident in it, and he came through, man. He's a blue-chip player.
Those are the guys that I find the best candidates for most improved. A guy who was a relative nobody, or viewed as a decent player, maybe a starter, a solid player, who emerged now as a good draft pick, as a really valuable star or foundational piece. And I think Bam fits that criteria. For him to be someone who is averaging 16-5 or 16, 10, and 5 on a very good team.
Awesome. 1.3 blocks, 1.2 steals. He's sick.
Probably first team, all defense.
Yeah.
Bam is a really special player, and I love how he can handle the ball. If he was a better passer and a better scorer, he could be similar to Ben Simmons in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, he suffers a little bit at the free throw line, 0.69%, which is not great.
One thing about him is that he just doesn't keep the defense honest.
Yeah.
No threes.
He attempts 0.2 threes a game. He could really use some honesty from the other end of this discussion of this basketball court.
It's wild that no one ever talks about that failing of his inability to shoot threes. Weird.
The Sixers fan base, I love them. What an intense fan base. It's awesome. It's like, it really makes me happy, man. But the way they criticize and ride for their players is very intense. And as you said yesterday, maybe had a lot to do with the flu of 1918, I believe.
That's the theory I'm going with.
I love it.
If people in your city watch their neighbors' children starve to death through the window because they were afraid to come near them due to the Spanish flu, sculpts the way you talk about your young superstars.
Yeah.
Maybe, potentially.
I mean, no Spanish flu, no Lil Uzi Vert. It's just a fact, man.
Many people are saying that.
They say.
But Bam would actually be my choice for most improved because he made that jump that I find really exciting. Good player to, whoa, you could be the second best player on a championship team. You're a stud. And I thought Siakam was a better candidate last year because he made that same kind of leap as a supporting star for the Raptors.
He deserved it more last year. You're right. What about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? Kind of disappointing, right?
I don't think he's good. There's something about him that I don't love.
What's
and I can't tell what it is. He might just be a little bit of a damp linguine for my tastes.
Wow. Can you elaborate?
There's a little Josh Richardson in his game. There's
Cooked
a little
fettuccine?
Yeah, there's a little rigatoni there.
Fusilli, Shy.
Do you think he's a pasta boy?
Pasta boys. Yes, he's absolutely a candidate for a cooked noodle on the court. He's on
Right?
the
He's definitely a little udon. Little udon vert.
Oh, those ramen regulars, man. Those wavy noodles. Yeah, he's one of those players. I thought he was going to be really, really good, but all these players take time, and I did not expect Chris Paul to be vintage Chris Paul. I kind of halfway expected him to be grouchy, force a trade, or sit out games. Instead, he just he pulled up his bootstraps and was the same Chris Paul.
CP3 is a top 5 MVP candidate this year.
CP3 is
He's filthy.
awesome. The interns put up, and people were doing top 5 lists in their boredom all day yesterday, and the interns put up their top 5. I cannot disagree. CP3 was number 5, and I'm like, maybe, tell me why not.
Wow, it's nice when the interns' insane views dovetail with our own. It's nice to see that, and they will get less cruel as a result.
Oh, yeah, even less. Is it possible? We'll find out.
There's one thing I believe. It's that you can always have less gruel. But you just give people half, and it is infinite. Always half less.
That's right. In theory,
you will never run out.
I have given you gruel. What are you complaining about? There is gruel there,
And there's less of it.
and even less.
But SGA has actually been quite good this year. Not incredible, but his numbers are impressive for a second-year player. You know, he's 19 points a game. 6 boards, 3 assists. They're not great though.
His
They're
advanced
Josh
numbers
Richardson-y.
are good. Yeah, right. His advanced numbers look like Josh Richardson in Miami a little bit. He's a plus player for sure.
So he's a solid player. I like him. I think he could become very good. But right now he's kind of like evolving talent, if you will.
I really love that trade for Oklahoma City for Paul George, because I thought the timing worked better for Oklahoma City, but you get Paul George when you can get him. But I'm less bullish about that now. Seeing Gilgeous-Alexander play a full season in this system, I still think he's going to be on the cusp of being an all-star, depending on his usage. But I was thinking big things for him this year, and it didn't quite pan out.
I don't know what OKC really wants, but they might be, and we'll see, they might be one of those teams that somehow figures out a way to contend and put an entertaining product on the floor while simultaneously rebuilding. But the qualification is the picks that they have coming are from generally good teams. Mm-hmm. So they're going to end up with a lot of first-round picks over the next 4 or 5 years, like tons of them. But we'll see if those end up being as valuable as they could be, because they're coming from places like Miami and I think Miami. But they're definitely coming from places like the Rockets and the Clippers, etc. And those are teams that are going to be likely competitive.
Yeah.
But for the time being, OKC is a great success story this year.
Yeah, I love it.
They're a cool team. They're 5th seeded in the West. They were winning a lot of games. And you know what? The way it's set up right now, if they don't play any more games until the playoffs, they got Utah in round 1. I think they can beat Utah.
Wow. Flu Lives Matter? You think they can beat them? There's a heater of a take, but I'll accept it.
Twin infection.
Are we going to see these games, you think? Hard to tell, right?
Let's just say yes.
Yeah, okay. Moving forward, Gen X tranquility, the playoffs are going to happen. We're going to get these games, and we're going to be talking about ball.
Yeah. Exactly.
I love it.
So this idea of most improved players, a lot of it is reliant on opportunity and rising up the food chain from second option, third option to being the main guy. Most shots, handling the ball, able to create and pass. Some guys succeed more than others. And this has been something we talked about with Doncic and Siakam. So one of the conversations on Twitter over the last couple of days was like, what would you like to have seen in the NBA that we didn't get a chance? And for me, it would have been something like, I don't know, Allen Iverson with like Dirk Nowitzki or Paul Pierce, if they had drafted someone instead of Larry Hughes. Those kind of things.
Oh, my
Or
God.
if Tim Duncan had fallen to the Sixers. But someone, our buddy, who's Glad Hands, I know him from the past, who goes as, was it Frazier Presents?
Tight.
Anyway, Jason Johnson, friend of the pod, said he was like, I wanted to watch Manu Ginobili in his prime as a 6th seed and the number 1 option. And I thought about that. And I agree.
I was
Manu
waiting. I was like,
Ginobili,
does he agree?
Manu Ginobili, first option, would have been a terror.
Hopefully, yes. It's all on. And a couple of days ago, when we were talking about ugly babies, we mentioned Tim Duncan as maybe the sire of all ugly babies. And in that discussion, we mentioned how the Spurs were perceived as this boring team because of him. He was the big fundamental. He was up and down. He was straight up. But I thought it was a misconception because Manu Ginobili was one of the most exciting ballers of that era. He was a slasher. He was a lefty. He brought the Euro game into the NBA. He was an amazing dribbler. He was fast, and he came off the bench, so there was a sense of drama every time he entered the game, being like, this guy is an all-star that they're just saving on the bench. So there was a story with him there, but I agree with both you guys. It's like, what would if he looked like in a situation where he was the man?
A few things about Manu are interesting. And one of them was that he didn't get to the NBA until he was 25. And he didn't play a ton of minutes that year. So he really emerged on the landscape at 26, which is, of course, much older than other players because he had been balling professionally overseas. And he played until he was 40. So he ended up having a long career, but he kind of entered more or less in his prime. But it also prevented him from having those like 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, something like 5 to 6 seasons where he would have put up numbers. So him coming in and being for his entire career a guy who rarely played over 30 minutes a game and was a 6th man for his entire career. I take that back. There was a couple of years when he started, like 2005, he started a lot of games and a few other ones. But generally speaking, he was mostly someone who came off the bench and did not play an enormous amount of minutes. We might have been robbed of like an absolute superstar.
It's hard to tell, right? Like, I'm looking at his usage. He's never gone past 30%. His high was 28.7 when he was 30 in 08. You're right. And like, but he was famous. I think he was lauded for offering his services off the bench. He was like, I'm more valuable to the team coming in as a substitute for the second unit sometimes. And, he's a finisher, so it doesn't really matter because, well, it does matter because he gets to play against the second unit, and he really thrived there, and he knew it. So there is a wrinkle of doubt in my mind about how he would function as a number 1 guy.
I just think when you look at those numbers he was putting up, like true shooting percentage, those years that were like 05, 06, 07.
In 2012, it was 668.
It's just insane.
Really great.
Those numbers, but like 60%, 59%, 61% in that 05 to 07 stretch, where like per 36 minutes he was putting up, 19, 20 points, 21.7, 22 points. If you gave him more of an opportunity to play and his efficiency sunk, he still would have been like really, really good. And in that era, there weren't a lot of guys who were hyper efficient who weren't just shooters. Nash, Dirk, guys like Michael Redd, they were the efficient players in the league. But to have someone like Manu, who was a creator, who drew tons of fouls, who got to the hoop, and who shot a lot of threes, I think he would have been just a monster if he had been unleashed as like a team's number 1 option. But he was also someone who didn't play a lot of minutes, had health issues as it was, And maybe he could not have taken the kind of wear and tear that like we see from James Harden. But that's always the comparison to me. Like, he's James Harden.
Yeah, a stat that really points to your favor is his free throw rate. Career was a 398 free throw rate, and he shot very well from there. He shot 827. So, like, that points to superstar to me. The ability to get your money from the line.
I mean, it's James Harden. You look at those free throw rates, some of those seasons, he was like 450 and then taking, 40% of his shots from threes. It's very, very Harden-y.
Yeah, and the calculus is there for his numbers, and what you were talking about is the question: could he have stayed healthy? And the usage or just him being on the court was always a risk because he was always hurting. Remember, we were scared he was gonna get rabies because he slapped down that bat.
Legend.
He slapped a bat out from the air. I mean, pretty hilarious.
But yes, I do think Manu. I do think Manu was an absolute superstar that kind of slipped under the radar because he was part of a Spurs franchise that encouraged players to sort of subsume themselves into the greater whole. And that was led by someone like Tim Duncan, who bought championships by taking less money. Yeah. And Manu took far less money than he could have.
Yeah.
And they all did. And they did buy championships by doing that. It enabled them to add more talent than other teams because they weren't paid according to scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So basically, the Spurs have no rings. I'm sorry.
Right. Unethical. What would be, other than Manu, what would be the scenario or storyline you wish played out?
It's just Manu. No, the one I mentioned before. I wish that the Sixers had used Allen Iverson in a way that was more contemporary. That's really what it comes down to. Not even playing with other talented dudes, just that they had used him in a way that we now know makes sense.
Yeah.
Putting the ball in the hands of an unguardable player who's also a wizard passer who can get anywhere he wants on the court and was a capable shooter, could finish at the rim and say, okay, you're going to do all that and we're going to surround you with guys who can shoot and guys who are talented offensively. And instead, the Sixers did the opposite and had a roster that was just completely laden with unskilled blockheads who filled the paint and made every time he drove into the basket like an incident where he got flattened. And I think him playing that abusive style while also leading the league in minutes every year took a toll on his career. Maybe it wasn't all his attitude or his unwillingness to, take on new roles. It was that he had been so abused and battered by those seasons that he kind of fell off a cliff in a way that he shouldn't have as a guy who had his speed and talent level.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the first part of that reminds me of Kevin Garnett too, right? Like the way the Timberwolves used him. Not exactly modern, but I wanted to bring up Scottie Pippen a little bit because I think he's a good example of the potentiality of a player like Manu, who's kind of a second or third fiddle on a dominant team. And we got to see Scottie Pippen play 3 seasons without Jordan. And history will say he really came into his own and we really knew he was a superstar without Jordan on the court.
Curry is the best example to me of this. Because if Curry was in the NBA 15 years ago, or was in his prime 15 years ago, he probably would have been used as a spot-up shooter. Mm-hmm. Or people would have used him as a point guard and made him dish more. It's unlikely we would have seen him taking 10 3-pointers a game from all over the place and being in an offense that rewarded him with spacing. Mm-hmm. Because when we saw Curry go against the Raptors after there were shooters off the court, all of a sudden Curry didn't look like the same player. When people were able to chase him over picks and trap him and double team him versus his ability to just get around a defender and all of a sudden be attacking a completely open lane. And we saw that happen because Durant went out and Clay went out. And all of a sudden, it looked like what Curry would have been confronted by on a nightly basis if he played in 1999. He's the best shooter ever who happened to play in the best era ever to be a shooter.
Right.
And it's not even down the line when the shooting of everyone will be elevated because now it's part of the sort of conventional wisdom of how you build a basketball team. He was the exact right point where the game shifted towards shooting, but most teams had not caught up personnel-wise. So to have someone like him was the ultimate weapon in a pace and space universe.
Yeah, and a lot of the responses of this tweet were, what if Curry was on the Knicks? Would we have championships? I'm like, no, but then you're getting into the boring wish conversation, which is, I wish the Knicks had a different point of view because he wouldn't have been cultivated in the same way in New York.
Absolutely not.
No, he doesn't become
And,
Steph Curry.
and they wouldn't have had the personnel around him to enable him to become the kind of player that we now know was sort of the idealized shooter in an era that rewarded specifically that skill.
Exactly. I love this. I love these alternate universes. Obviously, I just think of my own guy, but Ron Artest. What if Antonio McDyess doesn't get hurt? All this stuff. What if they don't trade Ewing? What if Houston doesn't hit that shot? This is like, I don't know. It goes on forever.
But, Curry was good in that finals against the Raptors, but he shot 34% from three. And that was because he was targeted. And that's kind of what I'm referring to. If he was in a different era where he was targeted in a different way and three-pointers weren't the focus of an offense, I think we would view Curry as a really cool, awesome player, but not a back-to-back unanimous MVP.
True. Yeah. I mean, the opposite end of this thought is like, what are the things in the NBA that you didn't, it's not as fun, but that happen that don't seem fair, that set in motion all these things that we talk about. And I just think of specifically like the Chris Paul trade being nullified and all these things.
Oh, a Lakers sympathizer, eh?
Player sympathizer. Players are allowed to like orchestrate and take less money in order to play on certain teams. Like Chris Paul should have been allowed to do that.
And if Chris Paul goes to the Lakers and they win a championship, then he loses that stigma of never got out of the first round, never made it to the Western Conference Finals, never made it to the finals, never won a chip. And all of a sudden we're just talking about him as one of the greatest players of all time, which he is.
Who's a little bit grouchy.
My favorite one of these is Melo.
Oh, I love Melo.
Because if Melo had left Syracuse after single-handedly
Detroit?
winning a championship and
Yeah,
been
yeah.
taken by the Pistons
Yeah.
with the second pick instead of Joe Dumars going for
Darko Milicic.
your boy Darko.
I love Darko.
If they had gone to the finals and won a chip with Melo on that team, then gone back and just gone to the finals as they did during what would have been his second season there, we would have looked at Melo as like the victory god, Nike himself, herself. But winning a chip in college, winning a chip rookie year, going back to the finals year two, we would have looked at him as an absolute powerhouse. And that year after that, that third year, that was the one that the Pistons were phenomenally good and that got beaten by LeBron. And we would have had Melo versus LeBron on a stacked Pistons
Probably.
team.
Yeah.
Where we could have had, I mean, they won close to 60 games that year. That was after they replaced Larry Brown with Flip Saunders, and all of a sudden the offense got good. Surprise.
Weird.
Literally went from like 17th to like 3rd or something. But that team was so good. And if they had Melo and he beat LeBron in the playoffs, we would be talking about like a totally different career arc in the perception of Carmelo Anthony. He would have been Dr. Win.
And the Pistons aren't the most boring franchise on the face of the earth in
Yeah,
2020.
Melo would have been Win Butler.
It's interesting. Wait, is that a Arcade Fire reference?
Yeah.
Wow, amazing. But it's like, I love this, the collidism of when teams can't handle prosperity. And the Bad Boys 2 were so good, they overthought it and took Darko as like the unknown possible superstar. I'm like, there's a superstar right there. Melo was a sure thing. There was no doubt. There's redundancy in his size and his prototype of player to your roster, but you take the future Hall of Famer. Darko is nice too. He would have gone with the next pick, but at the time, but it was an error we saw in real time where everyone was like, that was the wrong pick. Even though the Pistons are coming off so much success, they made an error that could affect their franchise moving forward.
And of course, who cares about the Pistons? They end up winning a chip anyway. So
yeah. So it's worth it.
That grievous error was forgiven immediately. Okay, that was a mistake, but they won a championship. And then they went back to the finals, and then they were really good. And it took a little while. And by that time, people were sort of forgiving of them bungling that pick. But I'm more interested in what that would have meant for Melo, who is a well-liked but somewhat tragic figure in the NBA. And had he come out and immediately got a couple chips or even got one, I think the perception of him would be so different.
I agree. But I feel like the perception of him is also wrong. And I find him to be an overwhelming success and one of the coolest players of his generation. And I have, even being disappointed in him on my team, I just love him so much, man. He came through on his promise. He was a great NBA player.
You know what? Let's end here on high praise of the god Carmelo Anthony. Misjudged, misunderstood, misdrafted. The boy, Carmelo Anthony. Cookies.